Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us again today. My name is David Talbot. I'm Managing Director, Head of Research here at Red Cloud Securities, and I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar on uranium today. We are going to speak to F3 Uranium VP Exploration, Sam Hartman. Now, during today's webinar, he will provide an overview and outlook. Then we'll take some questions. You can type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can. But before we kick things off, first we need to discuss the fine print. During this F3 Uranium webinar, forward-looking statements may be made. I direct listeners to the forward-looking statements outlined on page 2 of the corporate presentation. That can be found on the company's website, f3uranium.com. For Red Cloud Securities, I'd highlight this information. This webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell. We note this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. So please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures on F3 uranium. Now, with that, I turn it over to Sam to update the audience on the company.
Well, thanks for the introduction there, Dave. I'm Sam Hartman, VP Exploration of F3 Uranium. I think today we wanted to sort of discuss our newest discovery on the west side of the Athabasca Basin, what we call the Tetra Zone. For those familiar with the story, we found a shallow high-grade zone called the JR Zone in 2022. We've been exploring the property and the adjacent property ever since. In 2024, we acquired a new piece of ground, which is now what's hosting the Tetra Zone. We hit it fairly fast and hard. We got permits this February. In March, we started geophysics. We put the drill on the first geophysics line also in March. And by April, we had a high-grade discovery there, which is what we call the Tetra Zone. Located, we're about 12, 13 kilometers south of JR Zone and sort of kitty corner, if you will, to the Paladin's RRR and Arrow's Nexgen's Arrow deposits to the southeast. The highlight drill hole 205 that we hunted for sort of on this initial geophysics section that we did, we kind of homed in on it based on alteration and some anomalous radioactivity. And we did manage to hit some high grade in there, including about 0.5 meter of over 10,000 counts per second, with some visible pitch blend and very encouraging styles of alteration within that, which we were sort of familiar with. But this new zone also has a lot of different things to show for that are new to all of us. And I think we can go to the next slide here. This is a bit of a zoom in right away on the zone. Hole 205 is in the middle. You can see the cint counts on the drill hole. We've been trying to expand the zone along strike and up and down dip, which is fairly typical with how you initially take these discoveries forwards. The red line on the map is the interpreted conductor axis. Now, typically in the basin, we are exploring for faults, which is what's hosting these basement-hosted deposits. And these faults are conductive structures. So therefore, we look for conductors. Now, what's unique about this zone is that it is covered by a thick layer of very conductive mudstone. And that is why historically that entire area hasn't been known to host any conductors, and that includes airborne and ground-based geophysics as well. So we had a hunch that that area would be fertile for some shallow high-grade mineralization. We looked at historic VTEM data and we saw some trends in there we liked. Did the ground geophysics, ground EM, and this is sort of one of the initial interpretations is this red line, which we started drill testing. And what we noticed right away was that although we are targeting this conductor, we're seeing clay alteration, we're seeing some anomalous radioactivity. What we're not seeing is any graphitic structures or anything in the drill core that kind of definitely tells you that you've intersected the conductor, right? So we went back and forth with the model and tried to reconcile the geology against the geophysics. We did quite a few reinterpretations. And the best thing basically we could come up with at the end was this 100-meter wide conductive corridor where, depending on your interpretation, that structure could be sitting anywhere in there. In the meantime, we kept drilling this thing along strike. We're getting variable radioactivity, grade alteration along strike, but we're still not 100% sure on the exact strike of the conductor. There might be a bit of variance from this model, and that's just based on the fact that it's just one section line, and the data can be looked at and interpreted in many different ways, right? And I think that's sort of, what ultimately the reason was that historically there hasn't been any drilling in there. People walked away because, there's no ground or no airborne conductors in there. You're not in the right geological domain, and all these things kind of stack together. So ultimately, when we went in, we made this discovery based on very preliminary geophysics. So by the time we made the data, we still didn't have very much background information that you usually would have accumulated by then, right? And that's sort of the position we're still in. So that's why one of the next steps for us is going to be probably a bit more geophysics to get a bit more clarity on the strike of this thing. So this here is just a summary slide, sort of overviewing the 4 discoveries we made. Tetra Zone is obviously the 4th and the latest on behalf of F3, and that was 205, 22.5 meters, averaging 0.26%, with a bit of high grade in there, a meter of 2.5%, and that did correlate obviously with the 37,000 counts on the hand synth that we initially released. Overview of the 4 discoveries F3 has made. JR Zone 2012. JR Zone was 2022. Tetra Zone 2025, straight south, both on the PLN project. The Tetra Zone is actually on the Broach, we call it the Broach property, which is part of the Patterson Lake North project or complex, whatever you want to call it. And it's sort of in that southwest corner of it. This is just a little higher level overview, stepping back of the PLN property and project as a whole. Bottom left, you can see a whole bunch of parallel conductors with Tetra Zone in the middle. All those conductors were basically defined with about 3 single line ground EM surveys, and we drilled our 2 most favored ones, which one of them led to the Tetra Zone. Previous to that, there wasn't any conductors in there south of the A1 conductor, which is what the JR Zone is on. And we do have the Broach Lake conductors to the east, but sort of in that southwest corner of the property, we didn't have anything. And I think that is why we were able to get this property to begin with. We acquired it via trade. And like I mentioned, we went basically in 3 months from permits to discovery on that one. This is stepping back one more step, sort of to outline the discovery path to the Tetra Zone. On the left here, you can see VTEM. VTEM is airborne conductivity survey. You can see these dark purple, these hot colors in there. That is conductivity. And now a lot of that is the conductive mudstones, especially the stuff on the east side, which is this blob shape, these blobs. But when you look at the northern bit where you see Tetra Zone, you do see a strike to the VTEM, and in the center of it, you do see some enhanced conductivity that's in the line. And that was kind of our first indication that this is something that's actually parallel to the A1 conductor. It kind of terminates, the conductivity seems to terminate like the A1 conductor does as well. And that was our first target. We wanted to stay out of this strong conductivity, which we thought is nuisance conductivity from the mudstone. So we just kind of went on the tip of it along strike of this linear feature, and that is exactly where Tetra Zone is found. So yeah, right now we have this conductor poorly defined over these 3 ground EM lines. It's about 1.2 kilometers of strike length. I think that we need to do a bit more geophysics in there just to better target our step outs. But it is a great start. We made this discovery very early in the discovery process. Like I said, usually at this point you have done a bunch of different airborne surveys. You've done ground EM, ground resistivity maybe. You have grids, you have a bunch of drilling. And in this case, all our work was focused on this one line, right, where we made the discovery. But the very first hole we actually drilled was hole 201. You can see it on the map. There's a core picture of it. You can see this very dark bitumen and oil-soaked rock at the top, probably Athabasca sandstone. Right beneath that, we have very clay-altered and basement rocks that has dravite veinlets shot all throughout it. These dravite veinlets are boron-rich. These are something that you look for as indicators of being proximal to uranium mineralization. We see that in most deposits in the basin. And 201 was our first hole. I do think in hindsight that it probably did overshoot the conductor. At that point, we didn't find anything graphitic in the drill hole, which is what we were looking for. And we moved on to the next line over, where we had even better alteration and then some anomalous counts over 90 meters, which was our first press release of this new, what we call the PW area. And then hole 205 discovery shortly after. So then we went and looked back at the historic drilling. We have, you can see it on the map, there's one hole there, Pat 1602. That was drilled in 2016, based by a previous operator. And these guys hit a very strongly altered bedrock. And we assayed it. It actually had never been sent out for analysis before. And we get our highest single grade uranium assay outside of the zones on the property, 423 ppm. And that kind of reinforces that our belief that there is a continuing structure through there, that even though we don't have the graphite, we do have clay altered structures. We have conductivity, which is weaker, but it's still there. And we really think that there's a really good piece of strike at the very least in between these two holes, right? 205 and 201. And it's likely to continue a bit beyond those as well. This is sort of a section of the line with hole 205 on it. You can see it in the middle there. That is a core photo of the highest grade bit. You have very hematite altered bedrock with visible pitchblende in it. The pitchblende is the dark material. This is a subsample. We basically cut these down to half-meter sample size. This is a bit less than that. So if we would have submitted just this piece, it likely would have been, graded a bit higher than 2.5%. Nonetheless, there is high grade in there. The style of it is similar, but not exactly the same we've seen before. It had quite a bit of calcite associated with it, which was new. But nonetheless, the grade and the overall mineralized interval is definitely there. And that speaks right away, basically, for us to the size of the system, is that when you have grades like that and mineralized intervals of 30 meters, you're looking at a system that can host something potentially much bigger than this, this initial result, right? This is another core photo. So this is kind of like one of the main mineralized intervals in hole 205. Well, you can see there's some similarities between this and other deposits that we've all seen. Hematite alteration, very common. Brick red, as they call it. Clay alteration and bleaching. So in this case, you have a lot of the feldspars are altered to clay. It's variably soft. And you have bleaching in these rocks, fracture-controlled bleaching. What we don't have is the usual graphitic brittle structures in there, or what some people call the mother fault. It's just not there, right? And I think that's fairly unique so far to this Tetra Zone is the lack of that. This right here, we have basically the similar picture as we had in our news release this morning. On the left, we have 3 zones within the Tetra Zone. We have an upper bleached portion just below the unconformity. Then we have some shallow bleaching and hematite alteration, very typical of these rocks, which are mostly intrusives. So that is, you have moderate clay alteration throughout. Overprinting that, you'll have fairly intense hematite as these discontinuous blobs, and then cut across that is you'll have dravite veinlets. And as well, also you'll have bleaching around fractures. And at the bottom, we have a picture of footwall gneiss. Now, if you look at that gneiss, you can see it's fairly well banded, and it looks like what we call country rock. It's something you can see anywhere, certainly anywhere on the west side of the Athabasca Basin, in fresh rock. And that's what defines the Tetra Zone, is sort of these three things. 1.2 kilometers along strike to the southeast. This is the historic pad hole 02. We have the same, very similar signatures, right? 1.2 kilometers apart. You have clay alteration and bleaching. You have 423 ppm, which is, like I said, the best single sample result on the entire project. In the upper basement rocks, you have exactly the same patterns of bleaching, hematite alteration, and similar fracture and jointing patterns. And then footwall gneiss, deeper basement looks exactly the same. The pat hole is vertical, so the foliations look a bit different from 205. But what we see now is 1.2 kilometers apart. You have Tetra Zone on the one end, you have this on the other end. At the very minimum, the 1.2 kilometers in between right now is our exploration target. Beyond that, of course, we can try to pull it beyond each of these two zones along strike as well. And I think that's the main takeaway, is that Tetra Zone is a fantastic start to a new project or new property. It was made very early on in the process. We don't quite have the background geophysics we usually do. So right now it's a bit difficult for us to target, for example, call it a 500-meter step out, because that puts us in between the two single lines, right? One around hole 201 and one around 205. And we'd be guessing, you'd be drilling a 3,000-meter fence to sort of pin it down. So I do think some geophysics in there is definitely warranted. And, that's something we're kind of planning to do right now. It'll be something fairly non-traditional and something that involves having both a source and a receiver downhole to sort of get rid of the effects of this conductive mudstone. And this here's the similar map as it was in the news release. You can see this 1.2 kilometers, PAT 1602, strong uranium results, hole 2501 that we drilled, a very strong alteration near the top. And our target area right now along strike is sort of in between these. So it's kind of in between 202 or PAT 1602 and PLN 2501. A long strike of 205, and that's what we're doing right now with a diamond drill on site. JR Zone, we can do a quick step back to JR Zone. We did announce our last 2024 assay results just a while back. We did drill 4 more holes at the beginning of this winter program that we've released since for. Assays for that will also be included in the resource estimate. And we do have 2 last holes that were pre-cased from last year that we're actually drilling this very moment on the JR Zone. So it'll be 6 more holes beyond the last news release that'll be included in the resource estimate. We're working on that with SLR that we have a long relationship with, and I think we're targeting Q4 sort of for the maiden resource on that. Hole 176 was our best drill hole. We had 7.5 meters of 30%, and I think the GT of that hole was just over 230. So it's definitely a very fantastic hole, especially considering that it's true thickness. JR Zone also doesn't have any graphite. It does have minute amounts of graphite here and there. It's still a lot different though from Tetra Zone. And I think that even though they are parallel, and I think in terms of age and genesis, they're going to be similar, they are different just because of the nature of how they're hosted. JR Zone is hosted in the graphitic shear zone that we've, defined over kilometers and drilled many holes into. B1 exploration, when we found, it was I think 2024, we realized there's this giant offset offsetting the A1 main shear zone from the B1 area. There's 200 meters of throw. We were very excited at that time. We finally got all the results back from our 2024 exploration drilling, which has been quite extensive. And that is still a high priority area for us to get back in there. We have great results. Some just came out. Hole 178 was the last one. We have the continuation of the A1 shear. It's continuing past this fault. And that's where we're seeing the best results. And that's not really surprising considering that A1 shear zone is what's hosting the JR zone. So now it's carrying across this fault. And of course, it's one of the more prospective structures south of the fault as well. We do want to get back in there, and there are great targets. I think for the time being, certainly for probably this calendar year, I think that the best way to add value to the company is going to be at Tetra Zone and that PW area there, and try to find another pod there, or, I think that's our best shot at hitting more high grade for right now. Definitely we'll come back to B1 at some point. And that kind of sums up our 2025 exploration ideas. There's still quite a few untested things. We have this Broach Lake conductor on the southeast portion of the property. Great conductor. We remodeled it. It's steeply dipping. The strike on it is parallel to the Carter and PLS trends, completely undrill tested. We have the A4 grade where we also did ground EM. We have conductors up there. There's one historic hole in there that we did in 2014. Some anomalous uranium at depth. Again, another area to go back to. And that's sort of the blessing and the curse of the PLN project as a whole. You have several very good areas that are seemingly separate from each other. They have separate strikes, separate systems. So we just kind of got to pick our battles and go with what's the most, where can we generate, sort of the most significant news in the short term. And right now that is the Tetra Zone, and that's why we're going to stick with it for now. And that's a bit of a corporate summary on the share structure, market cap, and our board. And I think that's about my rundown on Tetra Zone. I think that what we could do now is maybe take some questions, and then I can hop back to the slides and use those to answer any questions, Dave.
Okay, sounds good, Sam. Thank you very much for a good presentation. Lots of geological interpretation in there, and we're probably going to focus on that here on this call, using your skill set. So let's kick off the Q&A portion, everyone. Please, reminder that you can type your questions into the chat box at any time. I've already got some questions here, Sam. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I think I've been fortunate enough to be here for all 4 of these discoveries over the past decade and a half here. Written them up, some of them even before discoveries, and helped finance your exploration. So anyways, congrats on another discovery here. I guess first off, why did F3 decide to step away from the JR zone a little bit and start looking elsewhere on the property that really led to this?
So good question. That part of the province, that property that was available straddles the unconformity, or it straddles sort of the edge of the Athabasca Basin. So half is in, half is out, kind of, and that alone puts it in a very interesting spot. At the same time, we knew that there was potential down there that's been overlooked because people haven't been able to image any conductors there because of this thick mudstone, right? So we basically acquired this small sliver of property. We added it to the Broach Lake. We call it Broach Lake property. We've been wanting to go in there since we acquired it in 2024, and I've wanted to go in that area before that. And we actually had a very specific deposit model or target in sight when we went in there. Those lines, those geophysics lines they're basically picked very carefully. And what we were looking for is some high grade, very shallow mineralization near the edge of the basin. So what we found now is Tetra Zone, which is a bit deeper. It's about 350 meters deep. It is under sandstone. It's not exactly what we were looking for. I mean, there's a saying, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. That's certainly the case here, but I do still think that we still have more to find.
Okay. So were you searching for these typical EM conductors that usually host graphite, that usually tell you there's a structure there? Or did some of these historical holes actually point you in that direction? You did put out a press release today with the first assays from these historical holes. So were there any radioactivity anomalies out of those?
So Pat 1602 that had the 400 counts, it did have a little bit of a kick on the gamma, but nothing that would have led you to believe there to be that much uranium in that drill hole. Actually, first thing we did is we re-logged, re-photographed, and resampled all those historic drill holes, and that bit wasn't very radioactive. And that's not necessarily that unique. We see that in JR zone as well. There's a lot of samples that are below 300 counts that have more than 500 ppm uranium in them. So we resampled based solely on alteration.
Okay.
Those drill holes, when those historic drill holes were drilled, they were not targeting conductors because there weren't any at the time. They were targeting very broad gravity anomalies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is a little bit of an unusual area to drill, right? It's a little bit to the east of, to the west of where most people are looking, even in the southwest Athabasca.
That's right. It's in this area called the Clearwater geological domain. It's basically an area that's defined on the magnetics. You can see there's a very high domain that people have been staying out of because that is some people say it's an intrusion. Some people think it's an old structure that led to intrusions. But the rocks in there were always thought to be granites. The Clearwater domain is granites. It doesn't have the gneisses that you're looking for. Therefore, the gneisses won't be sheared and you don't have these deposits. So 2 things different from us. We did go in there. There are gneisses in there. They're just intercalated with these intrusive rocks. There is structure in there because these broad structural domains do run through all the rocks up there, right? So when you're shearing these granites, you're just not really developing these graphitic shears. You're not developing these conductive shears, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So all the conductance is based on clay, which is a much weaker conductor, hidden under a very conductive mudstone. So it's very hard to see something that's that subtle, which is why the modeling is so broad and which is why it took us so many drill holes on section to find what we're looking for.
Okay. But you finally did hit uranium on 205 and I think more on hole 210 or so. But does that structure, I guess lack of structure in this area, look like what you'd expect elsewhere in the basin, or is this something that's really entirely new?
I think that, so there is structure, there is linearity. You can see it in the VTEM. There is a linearity. It is parallel to A1. I think that the same forces were at play that led to both. It's just this one was developed not in a rock that historically didn't have any graphite previously. And yeah, I think that you can certainly think about this in other parts of the basin for sure. Ultimately, though, even though it is a very weak conductor, it still was a conductor target that we targeted, right? So we did hit it. We targeted the conductor. We hit high grade, even though there's nothing that conductive down there. So that kind of, I don't know, maybe it means you should be looking at all conductors, regardless how strong they are, and
Yeah. So the graphite, being the usual conductor, is often, precursor to a reducing environment as well. Now, the bitumen-soaked sandstone that you showed us in that first hole, 201, would those hydrocarbons have been acting as a reduced environment here? Because it's not, I guess, common in the Athabasca that I recall. It's maybe more common in tabular sandstone deposits, in, let's say, South Texas, where you might expect that.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think that these bitumens are much younger. Some deposits like Triple R we do see radioactive bitumen as well associated with the high grade, right? In this case, what I think it is, it's just structural linkage that leads over to the west into the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin where you have all the oil sands. And I think you just have some bleed over from that. But it does show, what it does kind of reinforce, though, is that there is large scale structuring.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it possible that the structuring, large scale structuring, is folded over? So really, many conductors here represent a single folded conductor?
My view, I don't know. I'm not too sure on that. My view has always kind of been that all these conductors are fairly straight, and they're one of the last structural events. You've had reactivation on them, obviously, post Athabasca deposition. And since Athabasca Basin deposition, I don't know if I can think of a way that you would have had folding, really. So my thing is always these structures are fairly straight shots, and they're one of the latest things that were reactivated.
Right. Okay. JR zone, you continue to hit high grades here and really nice widths as you're completing your infill drilling. 6 more holes pending, you suggested. Remind us quickly when we might see that initial resource estimate.
So we're targeting Q4 of this year with that.
Okay. Is that so closer to year end, do you think? Or
yeah, I would say maybe fall or late fall, something like that.
Okay. Do you see any near zone upside, potential there at the J zone, perhaps down dip or a long trend close by? Is the resource estimate going to give us any, I guess, opportunity to follow up on the zone and see if we can expand it?
I think there's always room for improvement, no matter how much you've drilled these zones off. There's always a bit more bone to pick off, or meat to pick off the bone, so to speak. I think that's certainly the case at JR zone. I don't know if there's going to be a meaningful or material addition to the zone as we know it. We have fairly close spaced exploration drilling along strike. There's certainly room for more JR zone sized pods, possibly along A1. But I feel confident that the JR zone resource estimate will be fairly conclusive of what the zone really is.
Mm-hmm. And how much room is there along the A1 shear itself to test?
A1 shear east or west of the Harrison Fault, where it's not covered by sandstone. I think we've fairly thoroughly drill tested that. That's, of course, assuming that what we're looking for is similar enough to a JR zone style deposit. Of course, you always have potential at depth beyond your drilling, but I do think that these are unconformity related deposits, and you need to be in proximity sort of to the unconformity. I think our best shot on the A1 conductor is going to be south of the fault, Harrison Fault, and down by the B1 area.
Okay, the A1 extension B1 shear area. Now, everything really screams uranium deposit. You've got pathfinders, You've got alteration. Everything except for perhaps lack of uranium. Now, how has this strongly deformed structure, intense alteration, actually worked against you in trying to find the source of uranium in the area?
I think that in that area, you have alteration and also geochemistry over quite wide intervals, especially in the sandstone. You have, I think we released at one point over 10,000 ppm boron. You also have these parallel shear zones. I think that what works against you is just the size of the system that you're exploring, right? If you look at the drill core of these holes, like 178, everything is there for it to be a near miss. And all it takes is for you to get in there and get lucky one more time. And I do think that we are going to go back in there. Not right now, though. Right now, we have to, we've got unfinished business down at Tetra Zone.
Right. So would you simply need to drill the area systematically, or would additional geophysics help pinpoint some
we've done a lot of in terms of geophysics. I think we've done a lot of ground EM, we've done resistivity, we've done experimental joint inversions of the two, we've done the ground gravity. Obviously, with geophysics, you can always do more. There's always more in other surveys, but I feel that we have a fairly clear image of where the structure goes, and ultimately we can drill target it anywhere we want on it with a good degree of confidence. But it's going to be a numbers game of how many intercepts are you going to need to sort of get close to something bigger or into it. And I just think that, exploration as a whole, it's just it's a numbers game, and it's you're working the probabilities and try to stack them in your favor. And right now, the best potential for that is, in my view, down at Tetra Zone.
Okay. So you mentioned going back to Tetra, but maybe when might you step out into new areas on the property, like Broach Lake or A4 grid? Is there any need to go look elsewhere?
Yeah, there is. I think it has to be done in a balanced way, right? And we have to consider our cash and share positions. I think that stepping out to these different areas will be a great time to do when we have more than one diamond drill on the property. So maybe when we have two. So I think what we'd be looking for is a catalyst to bring a second or third diamond drill on the property. So it's a more high grade Tetra Zone kind of warrants escalating the program, bring a second diamond drill in. And then when you have two, you can sort of have one that helps you with infill drilling or step out drilling, but it also kind of roams around and tests these other locations sort of at the same time.
Okay. Maybe one more question here on Tetra. Are there any cross-cutting faults there along the Tetra conductor that really need testing?
Yeah, there certainly are cross-cutting structures. We've drilled some of these holes slightly off perpendicular to test for that. We do a lot of oriented drill core, obviously, which is all the drilling. We do see structures in all directions. And there are some north trending, so that would be perpendicular structure sets that do run close to the mineralization, and some even in it. So I think it's fairly typical of all deposits that you see where the deposit is along strike, but you always will have some structures that are crossing it. How relevant they are is usually not that clear. I'm not sure if I see right now a reason to specifically target one of those.
Okay, great. So before we wrap up, I guess maybe what are the catalysts that investors should really be looking for over the next few months, culminating in that resource at JR Zone?
I think the initial resource at JR Zone will hopefully backstop our evaluation sort of with have some pounds to our name. For catalysts, obviously drill results based, and hopefully a new discovery of a new zone. Okay. Obviously, we're chasing the high grade. We want that off scale as much as anyone, and yeah, I think we're going to get there.
Excellent. Okay, Sam Hartman from F3 Uranium, thank you for speaking to us today.
Thank you.
And congrats on that new discovery. So thank you, everybody else, for tuning in. Reminder, the Red Cloud Securities will be back on Wednesday afternoon. I will sit down with Sky Harbor Resources. So that's July 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern.